Hey guys, Drifter here. Today I want to talk about the best movie that I've seen this year, which is The Love Witch. The annual Halloween movie recommendations are coming up, but this movie in particular stood out so much, I feel that it deserves its own video. The Love Witch is a dreamy exploration of the daily life of a witch that can only cast love magic. Even though it was filmed and set in 2016, it looks like it's out of 1965 because the director filmed it on era-authentic 35mm film stock with old cameras, old lights, and everything actually from the 1960s. So again, to clarify here, I'm not talking about an old movie. I'm talking about a modern movie set in modern times that just looks like it's from the 1960s. I believe that this is because the titular Love Witch enjoys that aesthetic and sort of projects that aura around her wherever she goes. Throughout the film, you'll see some things break that aesthetic, such as modern cars, DNA testing, computers, and even some iPhones. Every time these objects show up in the film, not only do they look bizarre, being on that old film stock, but they also indicate important plot points where the modern world is creeping into the territory of the witch. This is the most visually interesting movie that I've seen all year, except for maybe Dune Part 2. But unlike Dune Part 2, The Love Witch was filmed on a budget of a meager $200,000, most of which was spent on the old film stock and the era-authentic equipment. And beyond just having a fascinating aesthetic, The Love Witch is a very smart movie with some unexpectedly subversive messaging, not in the way that you might think. I think that this film could best be described as a slow burn style horror movie. I also loved that the spells in the movie are real Wiccan spells that real witches cast because the director wanted her witches and her witchcraft to be as authentic as possible. So today I'm going to try to do a basic plot summary of the film, talk about some of the very impressive technical details, and then talk about the themes, which I think you're going to find very surprising. The plot of The Love Witch is admittedly meandering, and it follows the daily life of the Love Witch. She wasn't always a witch, but rather she was imbued with her witchy powers after being abused by her husband in a satanic ritual. Her love spells are ultimately too strong for all the men that she casts them on, and most of her partners fall into some form of mania or their hearts literally give out from beating too fast or being too in love with her. The first half of the movie is very slow, and it shows her accidentally ending the lives of a handful of men, and this is relevant to our later discussion. All of these were good men. This wasn't like a man-hating movie. These were just like normal guys that fell into a spider's trap. The witch herself is somewhat damaged goods and doesn't seem to be able to notice or understand the harm that she's causing. She genuinely believes that the men just leave her because they're no good. There's a side plot involving a suspicious wife of one of the men that she ultimately kills, and the latter half of the movie explores her relationship with a man so strong that he's able to resist her love spells. This will also be important later when we talk about the themes. Mixed into all of this, there are side plots of the Love Witch trying to run a small business, her dealings with a satanic cult, an ongoing police investigation into her dead partners, and a couple of other things that I don't want to spoil, but I do want to make it very clear that the first half of the movie is pretty slow. It's all set up, it's deliberately meandering, and the second half of the movie ties it all together in a sort of descent into madness type experience. When watching The Love Witch, you shouldn't expect a lot of gore, though there is some, and some blood and some murder, but you should expect a lot of full frontal nudity, both male and female, both young and old, hot and not. And there's also some gross stuff with bodily fluids because in this movie, witches cast spells with, well, period blood and some things like that. Though it's a minor part of the movie, I know that really icks people. We're going to move on to talking about the technical stuff, and then my favorite part's going to be the themes. The Love Witch is a technical masterpiece. This movie was on my radar, and I kind of skipped out on it for a few years because I thought it was an actual old movie. Movies from this era tend to be a little bit boring, a little bit PG rated, so I was really surprised to see that it was a modern film. The director, Anna Biller, filmed it only on 1960s 35mm stock, 1960s cameras, 1960s incandescent lighting, and 1960s microphones. Many of these were literally antiques that she had to source from collectors. She collaborated with cinematographer David M. Mullen, who had previously worked on Jennifer's Body, and won an Academy Award for his cinematography on The Marvelous Miss Maisel. My understanding is that he was something of an expert in this era of film history. The director also worked very hard to get as many era-authentic clothing pieces and pieces of furniture and props as possible. In some instances, she even delayed filming while she built her own props because some of them were simply unobtainable as they don't exist anymore. The actors in this film were all instructed to use an old presentational style of acting that was common in the 1960s, and to speak in the transatlantic accent, which is sort of a weird fake accent that was also very common in that era. So what you kind of get is a very modern looking I Dream of Jeannie film that is disconcerting when modern cars show up and suddenly spirals into violence because you're not expecting that. The witch herself, played by Samantha Robinson, would later go on to play heiress Abigail Folger in the 2019 film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, directed by Quentin Tarantino, and I guarantee you she got this role because I guarantee you Quentin Tarantino saw The Love Witch. The end result of all of this is a truly modern film with a modern plot that just looks like it came out of 1965, as if a cinematographer from the 60s traveled to the future, made a movie, and then went back in time. And again, for a very long time, I skipped out on this because I thought it was going to be a boring old movie, but I was shocked to find that it was modern, it was clever, it was very dirty, it was R-rated for good reasons, and I'm also just genuinely shocked at how good this movie looks for a meager $200,000 budget. I compared it a little bit to Dune 2 earlier. I think it does a similarly impressive thing with camera work and cinematography that Dune 2 did with the brown screens and the infrared cameras, except they did it with probably 10% of the catering budget for that movie. Almost every modern director now would probably just film this on digital and then throw a whole bunch of layers on top until it kind of looked old. I mean, that's what I do here when I try to emulate VHS stuff. But the director, Anna Biller, went all the way on this one and genuinely made it with all old technology. Now we're moving into my favorite part of the review, which is the themes of the movie, and I deliberately put this part at the end of the video because the basic summary of the themes and some of the plot will immediately turn off about half the audience. So please prepare your brain to hear something that you probably don't want to hear, and then give me like 30 more seconds to elaborate on why this is actually good. So the shortest description of The Love Witch, and what you'll probably see when you go to Wikipedia and IMDb and stuff like that, is that this is a feminist horror film. Okay, but hang on. Instead of being a stupid, man-hating pile of garbage like Lisa Frankenstein, this movie's actually very smart, and there's several layers to it, including a number of criticisms of feminism itself. As a matter of fact, about 3/4 of the movie is spent criticizing feminism itself and other feminist films. The hero of this film is a guy who's so toxically masculine that he's resistant to the Love Witch's charms, and that masculinity is usually portrayed as a good thing in the context of this movie. So I hope that you're still here with me and you haven't tuned out already. What I'm trying to tell you is there's some really complex layers and symbolism going on here. The idea for the movie came around because the director, Anna Biller, had been reading a bunch of self-help books. And one particular piece of advice stuck out to her, which was that if a woman wants to keep a man around, she should love him less than he loves her, which kind of felt very toxic and like awful advice. So she started modeling The Love Witch after that awful advice, and also after some of the femme fatale feminist characters of the 1960s and 70s, which she thought were actually pretty bad portrayals of women. My understanding is that the director wanted to show that this sort of female empowerment is inherently destructive. It's just showing off murderous women that act without ration or reason, and the Love Witch herself in this movie can never truly experience the love that she wants because she's incapable of giving that to anybody else, and also incapable of accepting responsibility for any of her own actions. Men in this movie are mostly portrayed positively, but there are some dirtbags here and there. As I mentioned before, the hero of the movie, if there is one, is a super alpha male macho guy who has his own internal monologue saying that he doesn't believe in love at all. He views love as kind of a weak sentiment for lesser men, and he is only dating the Love Witch because she's hot and would make a good, convenient wife that would look good for him. Now, we would probably say these traits are negative or toxic or this is a bad person, but these are the very traits that actually helped him persevere where everybody else failed. And this particular character is portrayed in a complex manner, varying flavors of alpha male douchebag and sympathetic victim who fell into a trap that he didn't know existed. And there are definitely themes in this movie about exploiting women, because there's a scene where the Love Witch's husband is an awful, abusive man. The only reason she even got her magical powers to begin with was because her husband had abused her, sexually assaulted her, and then tried to offer her up as a satanic sacrifice of some sort. Everything went wrong. There are other scenes where she uses her powers, we'll say, too liberally, and the entire town comes out to try to sexually assault her. These two would be more directly critical of men and more in line with standard feminism, but it's interesting that that mixes in with other criticisms of feminism. Another interesting side plot is that the Love Witch is involved with a satanic cult. Modern movies like to portray marginalized groups like Satanists rather positively. A modern movie would probably end with a ham-handed message like the good guys in church were actually bigots the whole time and the Satanists were being oppressed. And the Love Witch did a clever switcheroo by originally portraying her Satanist pals as an oppressed group just trying to live in society. But as you learn more about them, you learn that the Satanists are actually much worse than what the busybodies at church think of them. They aren't entirely without sympathy or entirely evil, but they are at a minimum wantonly irresponsible with their magic powers. So the point being, this movie's message is like an onion. It has many complex layers. Some of these even have conflicting values. It's almost like the movie is arguing with itself about gender dynamics in a way that I think is smart, and it's not ham-handed. To compare to Lisa Frankenstein again, which is one of the stupidest movies I've seen not only this year, but in a very long time. That's a feminist movie where it's like her to her, all men are pigs, let's cut off some dicks, you know, girls rule, boys drool, stupid stuff. A baby could write that. This is a movie that reads like a PhD student's thesis on modern gender dynamics and has a whole lot of meat to it to acknowledge a whole bunch of complex ideas. So whether you agree with the message of the film or not, it is at least a very interesting and well-crafted message that the director obviously put a lot of thought and time into before even beginning to write the script. So yeah, that's my review of The Love Witch. I think this is a fantastic movie to check out, especially if you like artsy movies. If you're one of those guys that like has a film history degree and you like cinematography and films and not movies, you don't like Transformers, you know, you like Dune, this might be up your alley. It's also up your alley if you like interesting themes. And to talk about some slightly different stuff, the big Halloween video is going to be coming roughly mid-October. This year, I'm going to try to review about 10 or 12 movies. So we'll say about 5 of those are going to be like 1-minute quickie fast ones, and about 5 of them are going to be a little bit more in detail. But The Love Witch was just so unique and so cool to me that I feel that it deserved its own video. It needed all of this space and didn't need to share with anybody else. So I do hope that you check it out, and I do hope that some of you enjoy The Love Witch.